So we have a fun video idea for you guys today. We are going to take a trip down memory lane and we are going to talk about every NFL team's worst move since 2020. So basically this decade, it could be a hire of a head coach, it could be a draft pick, it could be a free agent contract or a massive trade. We are going to go through every NFL team's worst single decision pretty much of the last 5 years. And some teams have far worse, like number one bad decisions than some other teams. So keep that in mind throughout this video and let me know, do you agree with or disagree with whatever I said for your favorite team down below? And do you just want to talk about it? Do you just want to vent about how bad some of these moves were? So we're going to start off with my favorite team. This one, I was going back and forth between two decisions for the Steelers. I thought it could be just keeping Matt Canada for an extra year or just, hey, promoting Matt Canada offensive coordinator to begin with was a terrible decision in hindsight, but I think it's got to be drafting Kenny Pickett in the first round, 20th overall of the 2022 NFL draft. The Steelers thought that Kenny Pickett could be their next Ben Roethlisberger, and they were investing into a first round pick quarterback for the first time since they drafted Big Ben back in 2004, and it was pretty much a disaster for Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh. They had one of the worst offenses in the 2 years that he was a starter in this league. I do wonder if Kenny Pickett would have been drafted by the Steelers if he went to any other school not named Pitt. Pickett did have a 14-10 record as the Steelers starting quarterback in 2022 and in 2023 combined, but he threw the same amount of interceptions and touchdowns, 13 picks, 13 touchdowns in his 2 years as a Steelers quarterback, and now they are searching for their next quarterback already. Is it going to be Russell Wilson, Justin Fields? We don't know. And there was some really good talent that went after Kenny Pickett that the Steelers could have used, like the very next pick in Trent McDuffie, because the Steelers have yet to have a cornerback one since Joe Hayden a few years ago. I mean, this one is going to be the worst decision we're going to talk about in this video. It is the true apex of bad decisions, possibly in NFL history, not just of the last 5 years. It is the Cleveland Browns trading for Deshaun Watson. So here are the pieces that the Houston Texans got in return for Deshaun Watson. Kenyon Green, a first-round offensive guard who didn't really work out, but they got Dameon Pierce, Will Anderson, Tank Dell, Kamari Lassiter, Jamal Hill, Caden Bullock, and the Browns received Deshaun Watson and made him the highest paid quarterback in the time that he had multiple sexual harassment cases going on. They gave him the most guaranteed money a quarterback has ever gotten, and he has been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league since this trade. He was suspended in 2022 and banged up as well. He went 3-3 as the Browns starter. He went 5-1 in 2023 before having a season-ending injury, and the offense was a million times better with 90-year-old Joe Flacco running the show for that team. And this year, throughout 7 games, Deshaun Watson had a 1-6 record, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, then tears his Achilles, and he may miss all of the 2025 season as well. This is not only the worst trade that we're going to talk about in this video, but it is potentially the worst trade in NFL history. And I'm sorry, Browns fans, for bringing this up on a random Sunday. For the Bengals, I was going back and forth. I could talk about them signing Trey Waynes to a 3-year, $42 million deal in 2020, which really didn't work out. But I'm just going to talk about their last 3 first-round picks. Now, obviously, Amarius Mims could be a very good offensive tackle in this league. He was projected to be one coming out of Georgia. He was the 18th overall pick in 2024, but he did not have the greatest rookie season. But you look back at 2023, and Myles Murphy has not done a great job in the first 2 years of his career in his first 30 games played as an edge rusher, only having 3 sacks total. And then also their first-round pick back in 2022, taking Dax Hill, who did suffer a season-ending injury this year in 2024. And that may catch up to Cincinnati over time. Not hitting on these first-round picks can really come back to bite them because we're seeing right now how bad their defense is overall. They're about to get really expensive if they pay both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins this offseason to go along with Joe Burrow's massive contract. They did very well drafting Jamar Chase in the first round in 21, Joe Burrow in the first round in 2020, as well as getting T. Higgins in the second round in 2020. But if you're not going to hit on these first round picks, it's really hard to build a Super Bowl winning roster around your premier pieces like Burrow, T, and Chase. So I would just say the worst moves have been just drafting in the first round for the Bengals over the last 3 drafts. For the Baltimore Ravens, they definitely don't have like the worst moves we're going to talk about in this video. I was going between 3 moves. I could talk about drafting Rashad Bateman in the first round, but it's not like the receivers that went after him were that much better. You could talk about giving Odell Beckham a 1-year, $15 million deal, and he didn't really work out in Baltimore. I'm just going to say that they kept Greg Roman a few years too long. Greg Roman was the offensive coordinator for the Ravens from 2019 to 2022, but it felt like after the 2020 season, he just wasn't the right man for the job anymore, and they've looked a lot better since Todd Monken ended up becoming their offensive coordinator. And Lamar Jackson did win an MVP being under Greg Roman, but it just makes you think how much better could Lamar have been if he had a better offensive coordinator like we saw this year with him and Todd Monken. But I don't know. I think the Ravens one was difficult, so Ravens fans, out of those 3 moves, the Odell signing, the draft pick of Rashad Bateman, or keeping Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, which was their worst move since 2020. This is a pretty easy one for the Philadelphia Eagles because they haven't really made that many bad moves since 2020. We just saw Howie Roseman construct another Super Bowl winning roster as they just won the most recent Super Bowl. So you could nitpick here. I'm going to say them drafting Jalen Reagor with the 21st pick in the 2020 draft, one pick ahead of Justin Jefferson, has to be their worst move because they were back-to-back picks at the same position, and Howie Roseman, a great talent evaluator, decided that Jalen Reagor was a better fit for this team. The 5'11 receiver out of TCU only accumulated 695 receiving yards in his first 2 years for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was on the Vikings in 2022, the Pats in 2023, and the Chargers in the most recent season in 2024, while Justin Jefferson has emerged to being one of the best receivers in the NFL, multiple-time All-Pro, four-time Pro Bowler, and you can make an argument is the best receiver in the NFL. And who knows, maybe the Eagles somehow don't win a Super Bowl in 2024 if they draft Justin Jefferson over Jalen Reagor, but come on, that's a bad move in hindsight. You could talk about a ton of moves for the New York Giants, but I think the main one is going to be extending Daniel Jones to a 4-year, $160 million contract in the 2023 offseason. And it was pretty much just off of one playoff win, beating the Vikings in the 2022 playoffs. Daniel Jones had a career record of 24-44 and a tie as his 6-year career as the Giants starter after being a first-round pick back in 2019. He was so disappointing throughout the first years of his career. And like I said, that one playoff win, beating the Vikings, really set this franchise back a few years, as after he got that extension, he finished with a 1-5 record throughout 6 games in 2023, 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and then tore his ACL. And then this year for the Giants, before getting waived, he ended up finishing with a 2-8 record throughout 10 games and is now on the Minnesota Vikings as the Giants are trying to find their next franchise quarterback. So I do think that Daniel Jones extension, while it was in reality a 2-year deal, still set them back a few years and could destroy the Brian Daboll, Joe Schoen tenure in New York. For the Dallas Cowboys, I don't know if they made a single decision that is as bad as some of the ones we're going to talk about, but I would say their biggest mistake was back in 2022 when they chose Michael Gallup over Amari Cooper as the wide receiver 2. CeeDee Lamb was emerging as one of the best receivers in the league, and the Cowboys front office knew that a massive extension for CeeDee was going to be on the horizon eventually, and they tried to cut Amari Cooper, but then they found a trade that sent him to the Cleveland Browns for a 5th-round pick and a swap of 6 rounders. That move freed up $20 million, which they used to sign Michael Gallup to a 5-year, $62.5 million deal. Then they franchise tagged tight end Dalton Schultz, which ended up being around a 1-year deal, around $11 million. So between Gallup and Schultz, that ended up being $22.5 million, and Amari Cooper would have been $20 million on their books. And after that, Michael Gallup basically had 1 year with 34 catches for 418 yards. Dalton Schultz is in Houston. And while Amari Cooper was definitely on the decline, he would have been far better as a wide receiver 2 than any of their other options have been since they traded him to Cleveland. This is an easy one for the Washington Commanders. We're just going to go back to the 2023 draft. Like the Philadelphia Eagles, they just took the wrong player at the right position. They needed a corner in the 2023 draft, and they decided to take Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback out of Mississippi State, 1 pick ahead of Christian Gonzalez, the corner out of Oregon, and Emmanuel Forbes ended up getting cut in year 2 of his rookie contract as a first-round pick, which is pretty much unprecedented, while Christian Gonzalez was an all-pro second-team member this year and started 16 games and turned into one of the best young coverage corners in the NFL. Vibes are high. This is a very good time to be a Washington Commanders fan with Jayden Daniels as their quarterback, but this was definitely a draft day blunder back in 2023. This would low-key be one of the worst decisions made in a while and would have sent the franchise back 5+ years if they didn't draft a franchise quarterback with the last pick of the 2022 draft. Yeah, I'm talking about the San Francisco 49ers and how they traded a haul, 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance in the 2021 draft. The San Francisco 49ers were looking for an upgrade over Jimmy Garoppolo to find their next franchise quarterback, and they ended up trading 3 first-round picks for a college quarterback that only played 19 games. Those 3 first-round picks that the Dolphins traded down with ended up becoming Jalen Waddle, used in the Tyreek Hill trade, and used another one to get Bradley Chubb from the Denver Broncos. While Trey Lance only ended up appearing in 8 games for the San Francisco 49ers, 2 games as a starter in 2022 after suffering a season-ending injury, and then was traded to the Dallas Cowboys in the 2023 offseason. I mean, shout out to San Francisco getting a 4th rounder that they used on Malik Mustafa, who was a very productive rookie this year, but still, this is one of the worst deals that we're going to talk about in this video, trading 3 first-round picks for a quarterback that ended up only playing 8 games for you. thank God for their sake that they drafted Brock Purdy a year later in 2022, because if they didn't, this team would be in one of the worst positions in the league. But they're also a great drafting team on day 2 and day 3. This is an easy one for the Seattle Seahawks. It's got to be trading 2 future first-round picks in exchange for Jamal Adams for the New York Jets. The Jets sold high on Jamal Adams at the perfect time back in the summer of 2020. They ended up shipping Jamal Adams to Seattle for 2 first-round picks that ended up being Garrett Wilson and Christian Darrisaw. That pick was obviously traded, and the Jets were able to get Elijah Vera Tucker. So yeah, getting Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker for Jamal Adams, who ended up falling off a cliff after he got traded to the Seattle Seahawks. He was coming off an All-Pro first team honors in 2019, and he was an All-Pro second team member in 2020 and was a good player for the Seahawks. He had 9.5 sacks as a safety in 2020, which is truly incredible. But then injuries really depleted the rest of his career in Seattle. He did appear in 12 games, but got no honors in 2021, then appeared in 1 game in 2022, and then 9 games in 2023 before leaving the Seattle Seahawks entirely. So 2 first-round picks for 1 good year of Jamal Adams. Yeah, not a great ROI for the Seattle Seahawks front office. For the Arizona Cardinals, you could go with 2 moves. It could be the Kyler Murray extension, but at the end of the day, they kind of had to give Kyler that deal. So I'm going to talk about them extending Cliff Kingsbury, their head coach, after the 2022 season throughout the 2027 season, just to fire him a year later. The Cardinals got off to a solid undefeated start to the 2021 season. They finished the year 11-6. They made it to the playoffs in the first time in the Kyler Murray era. They lost to their division rival, the Rams, in wildcard weekend, but then Cliff Kingsbury in year 3 got extended, only to get fired after a 4-13 record in 2022 to transition into the Jonathan Gannon era. So I think this is probably the worst move the Cardinals have made since 2020, but Cardinals fans, you can let me know, is there a move worse than this? When the Rams were able to work the cap to sign Allen Robinson to be the wide receiver 2 next to Cooper Kupp in the offseason of 2022 for a 3-year deal worth $46.5 million, we thought the Rams were geniuses. They got a great wide receiver 2 who had very productive years in Chicago, and then came off an injury-riddled 2021 season, and man, was he a massive disappointment in Los Angeles. He only appeared 1 year of this deal in 2022, and he played 10 games. He had 33 catches for 339 yards and 3 touchdowns and looked extremely washed. And that 2021 season for Chicago was the start of the Allen Robinson decline. He did have 1,200 yards in that 2020 season. He had productive years for multiple teams in Jacksonville and Chicago, but that was it, because this contract was a disaster for the LA Rams. Luckily, they were able to draft Puka Nacua late in the 2023 draft. Sorry, Broncos fans, but this is going to be up there with the Trey Lance trade and the Deshaun Watson trade as one of the worst moves we're going to talk about in this video. And that is the Denver Broncos trading for Russell Wilson in the offseason of 2022. And they gave up multiple future first-round picks, which ended up being Charles Cross, the 9th overall pick in the 2022 draft. They also gave up the pick that ended up being number 5 overall in the 2023 draft, which ended up being Devon Witherspoon. Some other players were involved in this deal, and then they also paid Russell Wilson a massive extension, which ended up being 5 years, $242 million, and it was so much of a disaster that they had to pay Russell Wilson $39 million, took even a bigger dead cap hit just for him not to be on their roster in the 2024 season. And after that extension, Russ only played 2 years in Denver. In 2022, it was an absolute disaster. They went 4-11. It was the first year with Nathaniel Hackett as the head coach. He threw for 16 touchdowns and then 11 interceptions, a massive drop off from his final year in Seattle. And then in his first and only year with Sean Payton as his head coach, they were a little bit better at 7-8, but like I said, they were willing to take a massive dead cap hit just to not even have him on their roster anymore, and they were a lot better with Bo Nix in 2024. So for Kansas City, you could go with 2 different moves. You could talk about them signing Jawaan Taylor to a 4-year, $80 million deal in the offseason of 2023. And Jawaan Taylor has been an absolute disaster for them as a tackle. The best part about the Chiefs offensive line is on the interior with Creed Humphrey, Joe Thuney, and soon-to-be free agent Trey Smith. But on the exterior with Jawaan Taylor, it's been a disaster. But I'm going to go with them using a first-round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was obviously the running back on that loaded 2019 LSU team with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. And he was the 32nd overall pick of the 2020 draft. And it's not just that they drafted a running back at number 32. There was just so many better running backs on the board. It also hurts that T. Higgins was the following pick at 33, Michael Pittman at 34. There was DeAndre Swift at 35. Oh yeah, how about Jonathan Taylor, who went 9 picks later at 41 to the Colts? J.K. Dobbins also went in the second round. So yeah, them just drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was a massive disappointment in Kansas City. He had a productive rookie year. He had 800 yards and 4 touchdowns throughout 13 games, but it went down every single year. He dropped in yardage in year 2, in year 3, and in year 4, and is now a member of the New Orleans Saints. So there was 2 moves that came down for me in the worst move for the Chargers since 2020. I almost talked about Brandon Staley and just that hire overall, and they only made one playoff appearance, and they had that massive playoff choke to the Jacksonville Jaguars during the 2022 wildcard weekend. He got fired after week 15 in 2023, and he had a 24-24 record across 3 years in LA. But I think one move that has to be a little bit worse is them signing JC Jackson to a 5-year, $82.5 million deal, and he only played 1 year of that 5-year deal before trading him to New England for basically late round pick swaps. In 2021, Jackson was an all-pro second team member as a corner that started 17 games for the Patriots, had 23 pass deflections, led the NFL, and only appeared in 5 games for the Chargers in 2022, and then 2 games into 2023 before getting traded back to New England. It was one of Tom Telesco's worst moves as the Chargers GM. That also maybe was a bad decision. When are we going to learn that hiring a Belichick assistant coach never works out? And the worst move the Raiders have made since 2020, there could be a couple of them, but I would say hiring Josh McDaniels was one of the worst. As McDaniels was hired in the offseason of 2022, and his first year, he went 6-11 as the Raiders head coach. They were one of the worst offenses and defenses in the NFL. He did not bring his Brady-like offensive play calling to New England, and then he went 3-5 throughout his first 8 games in 2023, and then got fired. So he only appeared in 25 games as a head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's still getting paid by Mark Davis today. Now, Josh McDaniels wasn't dealt the best hand in the world. They ended up trading decent amount of draft capital for Davante Adams. They gave Derek Carr a fake extension and then basically cut ties with him shortly after giving him that extension, breaking up the college duo of Derek Carr and Davante Adams, which inevitably led to Davante Adams being unhappy in Las Vegas. They tried to add a bunch of former Patriots in Chandler Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brian Hoyer, Jacoby Myers, and Brandon Bolden, and they all pretty much had limited success outside of Jacoby Myers in Las Vegas. But hey, shout out to McDaniels. He's the new Patriots offensive coordinator. Let's see how he's going to be with Mike Vrabel. For the Houston Texans, I'm going to say it's them going out and trading away DeAndre Hopkins in the 2020 offseason. Hopkins was coming off a year where he had 150 targets, 104 catches, 1,165 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns, and was listed on the All-Pro first team, and then was traded to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange with a 2020 fourth round pick for a 2020 second round pick, which ended up being Ross Blacklock, a 2021 fourth round pick that was eventually traded, and David Johnson. Remember how good David Johnson was in Arizona? Well, he was not anything close to that in Houston. As Johnson spent 2 years in Houston, he started 12 games in 2020, where he averaged just 57 yards a game throughout 12 games and was dealing with nagging injuries, while DeAndre Hopkins in 2020 was one of the best receivers in the league and had one of the best years of his career, where he had over 1,400 yards, 115 catches with Kyler Murray in Arizona. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, they've made a bunch of bad moves since the year of 2020, but nothing was worse than hiring Urban Meyer as their head coach. There were so many bad decisions in the very short Urban Meyer era in Jacksonville. It was maybe the Chris Doyle hire, signing Tim Tebow to play tight end, abandoning the team plane so that he could go to his bar in Ohio, at which one point he was filmed in close contact with someone who wasn't even his wife. It was a disaster off the field and on the field. It was insanely awkward. Oh yeah, and he allegedly kicked his own kicker, which finally led to the Jaguars firing him after going 2-11, wasting Trevor Lawrence's rookie season, and probably set the franchise back a few years. It is one of the worst head coaching hires we've ever seen in NFL history. For the Tennessee Titans, it has to be trading away A.J. Brown for a first-round pick, which ended up being Treylon Burks during the 2022 NFL Draft. This is a move that got general manager John Robinson fired because they didn't want to pay A.J. Brown a massive extension. He got traded to the Eagles during the 2022 Draft. The Eagles gave him a 4-year, $100 million contract as part of the deal, and Brown turned into one of the best receivers in the NFL in Philadelphia, and even got another 3-year, $90+ million extension because of how good he's been after the trade, while Treylon Burks ended up just spending 3 years in Tennessee, totaling 53 catches for 699 yards. That's just like 7 normal weeks for A.J. Brown, and that's what Treylon Burks has done in his whole career since being drafted. You want to know why the Eagles were able to build such a powerful roster this year in 2024? Look no further than a trade they made with the Indianapolis Colts back in 2021. The Colts actually traded a first and a third round pick for Carson Wentz. The Colts were desperate just to find a stable quarterback after Andrew Luck shocked everybody and retired a few seasons prior. In Wentz's only year in 2021, he was much better than his final year in 2020 with the Eagles. He went 9-8 as the starter for the Colts. He threw for 27 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, but the results were not good enough for the Indianapolis Colts as they traded away Wentz to Washington in the 2021 offseason. And the Eagles were basically able to use that first round pick to leverage that in a couple different moves, which ended up netting them A.J. Brown. Yeah, Carson Wentz to A.J. Brown a few years later. Incredible work by Howie Roseman. It's going to be a pretty recent one for the Atlanta Falcons. How about signing Kirk Cousins to a 4-year deal worth $180 million in the 2024 offseason, only to pretty much want to cut him a year later in current day. As this was essentially a 2-year deal, there was a potential out after the 2025 season because there was only $100 million out of the 180 guaranteed. But if Kirk Cousins is really going to be let go from the Falcons this offseason, either being cut or traded, 1 year in Atlanta, going 7-7, and then getting benched for Michael Penix late in the year. He led the league in interceptions with 16, and it's only going to be 1 year in Atlanta, and it was pretty much a disaster. I mean, the Saints have made a lot of bad moves since 2020. They gave Cameron Jordan just an extension just to give him one, basically. They never really entered into a full rebuild. I'm just to say that hiring Dennis Allen back in 2022 was their worst move. Dennis Allen was a coach for the Oakland Raiders in the mid-2010s, where in his first year, he went 4-12. Second year, he went 4-12, and then went 0-4 in 2014 and got fired after week 4. He got a chance again to be a head coach in 2022. The defensive-minded veteran in the league gets hired at 50, goes 7-10 in 2022, goes 9-8 in 2023, and then 2-7 and gets fired after week 9 here in 2024. And if you just look back on it, there were so many better candidates that they could have hired. So for Carolina, I didn't end up going with the Bryce Young trade up just yet because the jury's still out on that. Bryce Young could have a better career than Caleb Williams. I would still take Caleb Williams over Bryce Young, but you never know. So I'm going to go back and talk about a move they didn't make at the 2023 trade deadline. They were offered 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns, and they said no. It was reported by ESPN that the Rams did offer 2 first-round picks ahead of the 2023 trade deadline, and the Panthers thought that it wasn't a good time to trade Brian Burns at that point when he was going to be a free agent very soon. And then they ended up trading him a few months later to the New York Giants for way less than what they were offered by the LA Rams. They basically traded him away for 1 second-round pick. So yeah, potentially going from 2 firsts to 1 second. What are we doing, Carolina? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers haven't made that many bad moves since 2020. You could say the worst one they did was signing Russell Gage to a 3-year, $30 million contract in 2022. And this was essentially to be the wide receiver 3 behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And he only appeared in Tampa Bay 1 year in that $30 million contract. He had 51 catches for 426 yards in the 2022 season and never played for the Bucs again. I was going to mention that maybe keeping Todd Bowles over Dave Canales and Liam Cohen could end up being one of their worst moves of the 2020s, but the jury's still out on that one as well. I mean, for the Jets, it's got to be trading for Aaron Rodgers, right? But the Jets have made so many bad moves over the last 5 years. Drafting Zach Wilson 2nd overall is definitely at the top of them, but trading for Aaron Rodgers, who tore his Achilles during his first game in the 23 season, and then in 2024, with everything going on with Rodgers and what he demanded for this team, he went 5-12. Rodgers wasn't bad statistically in the 2024 season. The Jets had a lot of issues with their offense as a whole, though, and their defense, but the hype was at an all-time high. They were projected with Buffalo to win the division in the 2024 season, and they were never really close to that. The players that was netted in this trade was Lucas Van Ness in a swap with Will McDonald. I actually think the Jets made out well in that swap, and then the Packers also got the 42nd overall pick in 2023. That ended up being tight end Luke Musgrave, and then a 2024 second-round pick, which was traded to New Orleans, which ended up being Kool-Aid McKinstry. It just wasn't a good trade for the Jets overall, and they were probably better off going in a different direction. The Patriots have made a lot of bad moves in the post-Tom Brady era. You could definitely talk about hiring Gerard Mayo last year, Robert Kraft's handpicked next head coach to succeed Bill Belichick, and it didn't work out. He got fired in year number 1 and kind of cost them the first overall pick in the final week of the season. But hey, maybe it was a blessing in disguise. They ended up with Mike Vrabel anyway. I'm going to talk about a recent one, and that was a draft night trade in the 2024 NFL draft, which basically swapped them Ladd McConkey going to the Chargers and them getting Jalen Polk. Ladd McConkey was on the board when they traded down 3 spots with the Chargers to take Jalen Polk, who in his rookie year had 12 catches for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they could have taken Ladd McConkey for Drake May, who had 82 catches for 1,149 yards and 7 touchdowns. He had a monster game during wildcard weekend against the Texans, and I don't even know if Polk is going to be a top 3 or 4 receiver on the Patriots in 2025. The Buffalo Bills also haven't made a ton of bad moves since the 2020 season. I'm just going to talk about the Von Miller extension, which in hindsight wasn't a great deal. It was a 6-year, $120 million extension that was signed in the 2022 offseason, but Von Miller up to that point was still somewhat worth that contract. It's just he ended up getting injured, and now it looks like that deal wasn't worth it in hindsight. In 2022, he had 8 sacks, gets the extension, and then also gets injured in 2023. He had 0 sacks that year, appearing in 12 games. And then this past year, in 13 games played, he had 6 sacks. Can still be a productive player at times, but is 36 years old and is nowhere near the amount of money he's going to be getting paid. It's going to be a weird one for the Miami Dolphins, but it's basically their owner, Stephen Ross, violating the NFL's anti-tampering policy on multiple occasions back in 2019. And the NFL stripped the Dolphins of 2 draft picks, including their 2023 first-round pick, after finding the organization guilty of tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton while they were under contract with other NFL teams. They also had to forfeit their 2024 third-round pick. The owner, Stephen Ross, was suspended, and he also was fined. And he was also fined $1.5 million, which may just be a couple pennies to us. But either way, the Dolphins, who also needed to hit these picks on the margins, just didn't have a first and a third-round pick from this tampering policy, which is definitely going to come back and bite them when you're looking at what they could have added depth-wise throughout those 2 draft classes. I really wanted to talk about the Chicago Bears trading away a second-round pick, which, because of the tampering, ended up being a first-round pick at basically 32 overall to the Steelers for Chase Claypool, who just didn't work out whatsoever in Chicago. But I think them keeping Matt Eberflus for another year and maybe hurting Caleb Williams' rookie season development was maybe their worst decision. I don't know why they didn't fire Matt Eberflus after the 2023 season, and then he ended up getting fired after week 13, going 4-8 in the 2024 season. Maybe like the Gerard Mayo Patriots situation, it was a blessing in disguise because they ended up getting Ben Johnson. Maybe they weren't going to get Ben Johnson a year ago, but either way, it was just a head-scratching move for Ryan Poles and that Bears front office. The Minnesota Vikings, they've made a lot of good moves over the last 5 years, but I would say their worst overall decision-making was not landing any useful players on day 1 or day 2 of the 2022 NFL draft. They did a great job in the 2024 draft, getting JJ McCarthy, Dallas Turner. They got Jordan Addison in the first round in the 2023 draft, but back in 2022, they basically went 0-4 in their first 4 picks. They traded down to take Lewis Cine, who only appeared in 10 games for the Vikings before suffering a career-altering leg injury on special teams. And then they took Andrew Booth in the second round, Ed Ingram in the second round, and Brian Asamoah in the third round. And I think the Vikings not landing on any useful picks there in the 2022 draft could hurt them depth-wise in the future. The Vikings have operated like a different team throughout the 2020s. Yeah, Matt Patricia was the coach in 2020, but hey, Dan Campbell has done a great job as the team's head coach. They produce great coordinators, and the Lions have been one of the best teams in the NFL over the last 2 years. But I would say maybe one of their worst decisions was drafting Jeff Okudah, the corner out of Ohio State, in the 2020 NFL draft. Okudah just played 3 years in Detroit and was really only a full-time starter in the final year in the 2022 season. It's just a lot of good talent went after Okudah, like Andrew Thomas to the Giants at number 4. Maybe they could have taken a franchise quarterback in Tua, or Justin Herbert, who went 6th overall to the LA Chargers. So there was just some better players on the board. So I think that is one draft pick the Lions front office maybe would like to have back. And for the Green Bay Packers, another team that hasn't really made that many bad decisions. You can let me know, Packers fans, what is the worst decision your team has made over the last 5 years. But I would say just keeping Joe Barry as their defensive coordinator in 21, 22, and 23 really didn't do them any favors and potentially ruin some of the final years of Aaron Rodgers' Packers career. So that's going to be for me. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, I would appreciate you dropping a thumbs up. Let me know if you agree or disagree with whatever I talked about for your favorite team down below. We just hit 10,000 subscribers on this channel, so thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.